Traders, how are you? Marcello here, founder of the Day Trading Academy, co-founder of Speed Up Trader, where you guys can come and trade our money live for just a process starting at 120 bucks with accounts starting at $25,000. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. So, great week for the markets, right? I want to show you guys, for those of you guys, if you don't know, I made the podcast available for all of you. So if you are on iTunes or listening on Spotify, then you're not going to be able to see what I'm about to show you, but just go to YouTube. I'll try to describe it for you guys so you can see. Si quieres apagar las luces un momento para enseñarles esto en La Plata. So, let me know if you guys want me to follow up on the video that I wanted to show you about the silver, right? So I did a video, especially on the Spanish side. I might kind of, this trading view, I'll show you guys. I did a video where I was looking, this is silver. I was looking at the area right in here for the market to get to, and notice this beautiful just pop to the upside. Absolutely beautiful run. That's one of the main things that happened overall this week. Silver is actually the biggest profit when it comes to futures. So for example, if you guys are trading stocks, you make $1, then you trade one stock, you buy one stock, it goes up to $1, you make $1. With Forex, it's the same thing, unless you borrow leverage, right? You goes up 1 pip, you make a cent or $1, whatever it is. With futures, you make $1 in profit. You can make anywhere between $50 to about $5,000 in profit just with one position. So that's one of the reasons why we prefer to teach on the futures market. So let me know if you guys want me to do that update on the silver video. I can't remember if I asked you guys last week or not. So don't forget to subscribe. Hashtag Ask Marcello for all the questions. Been traveling through Philippines. It's absolutely amazing so far. We got all the traders set up. Shout out to Dominic in the Philippines, to Shelly as well. Shelly, she's taking everybody by the reins, and all the other people there as well. Not to mention all the names one by one, but it's a great team there in the Philippines. Overall, markets through the week, Monday to Thursday, we saw a rise to the upside. Investors and analysts were projecting a Fed cut as early as July. Global stocks also rallied on Tuesday due to a positive sentiment about trade took hold of the market. So on Wednesday, essentially, the Fed said all the expectations from before was that they're going to raise rates. That's why the dollar has been so high. That's why you've seen the market kind of go stagnant, among other things as well. News and notifications of what the economy is actually doing. But on Wednesday, the Fed, the central bank that controls the monetary policy in the United States, went out and said, hey, so the indications that we're seeing aren't that great, so we're not going to raise rates for now. And they gave an indication that they might lower rates as early as July. So that kind of sends shockwaves through the entire market. And then on Thursday, the S&P 500 set a new closing record. And then on Friday, the Dow reached a new intraday record, meaning that when the market closed, it wasn't at a new high, but during the day it was. So that's really the overarching piece of news that happened in the week, and that kind of rippled through all the markets as well. As you guys, I just showed you in the silver market, we saw that huge rise. And just to give you guys a little bit of a background, so the U.S. economy really right now is, I got to give out a shout out to my uncle. He always says this, it's the cleanest dirty shirt in the closet, right? So all the shirts are dirty, but the U.S. economy is kind of the cleanest dirty shirt, even though it's still dirty. So if the U.S. central bank, and remember, I always like to do these videos to explain it, how to understand what's going on, right? I'm never going to get political, so whether you love Obama, hate Obama, love Trump, hate Trump, left, right, center, purple, yellow, doesn't matter. I'm not going to get political. I'm just going to show you what things mean and report to you the facts, right? So if the Fed was expected to raise rates, right, everybody else in the world is either decreasing rates or doing quantitative easing. So they're literally printing money and then buying their own debt and their own stocks and things like that. So if the U.S. Fed, the central bank in the United States, raises rates, that gives a much better return than other places. So there's a bunch of institutions around the world, governments included, that actually buy as a reserve government debt. So everybody goes into the government debt because the interest rates are higher. So that creates an insane demand for the US dollar. That's why the dollar has essentially been so high. So now the Fed on Wednesday says, well, we're not really going to raise rates anymore. We're actually going to keep them the same, and we might actually lower them as early as July. So it's two things. One, the economy isn't doing as well as it should, or everybody's saying. Shout out to Trump, because it's always doing great, according to him, right? Any president would say the same thing. So then what happens is, well, if they're going to lower interest rates, that's going to help boost the economy. The huge chunk of the economy and things like housing and mortgages and consumer sentiment. So if 70% of the market is consumer sentiment, that's why the majority of the most evolved countries in the world, I don't know if I can say evolved anymore. I don't know if that's politically correct, so let me know if that's okay or not. The most desarrollados, I always do the Spanish videos first, so I'm thinking in Spanish right now. The most advanced economies, right? Kind of first world, we used to call first world countries. The majority of the assets of people are in the stock market. China's mostly housing. So we're talking about the US, we're talking about Canada, we're talking about Japan, we're talking about Australia, a lot of Europe. So what if they want to stimulate the economy, they need to make people feel rich. So the whole concept of this quantitative easing, what Mario Draghi reported this week, the US now lowering interest rates, that's going to help spur that idea. What happens? They lower the interest rates, but it gets the economy moving, it gets the expectations moving, and that literally makes the stock market spike. If the stock market spikes, everybody's retirement account and their stock market portfolios are booming. Everybody feels rich. They go out, spend more money. 70% of the economy is consumer spending. That gets the economy moving again. That's why this is such big news. End of story. Okay, so the U.S. indices overall are higher for the week, 2.41% positive for the Dow, 2.18% for the S&P 500, the NASDAQ 3.01% positive. The European markets also had missed results on Monday due to the fact that the euro took a sharp hit on Tuesday. Now that the ECB, the European Central Bank, President Draghi said that they're going to start new rate cuts and asset purchases to support growth. The European markets overall this week are mostly higher. Italy is up 3.77%. The dollar, it's not at pair, but the euro against the dollar is about 113. So if you guys are going to travel to Europe, I would highly recommend you guys do that very soon, because the dollar is not going to get any stronger against the euro right now. Latin America, the mostly positive. The biggest winner was the Bovespa in Brazil at 4.05%. The biggest loser was the Merval in Argentina, 0.48. In Africa and Middle Eastern markets, South Africa 1.28% positive, Egypt 0.98 negative. The positives and negatives, just so you guys know, I always report the biggest losers or winners. Asia and Australian markets, the Indian was the biggest loser at 0.77% negative, and the Hong Kong market was plus 5% positive. Huge news in Bitcoin this week. Surged above 9,000 for the first time since May 2018. Actually, right now, Saturday, when I'm filming this on the 22nd, it hit a high of 11,000. So very, very good news for you guys that trade the cryptos. Even Ethereum went up, I believe, over 300, if I'm not mistaken. And one of the things that essentially has happened is now that Facebook is into the cryptos, launching their own called the Libra, it's bringing a lot of what's called legitimacy to the market, right? Because the cryptos kind of were like for those psychos or, those other people that, a lot of people didn't trust them and things like that. And so now a lot of experts are saying now that more large companies are getting involved, that's boosting the market because it's proving its legitimacy. U.S. lawmakers also are saying that they're going to call for hearings on the Libra, which is Facebook's cryptocurrency, as I mentioned. And the chairman of House Financial Services Committees, mouthful, wants Facebook to testify about the plans, and the firm should hold them for a review. So Facebook is definitely in the crosshairs of the government regulation. Bitcoin gains for the week until Friday, obviously the end of the week, 19.60%, up to 9,920. Financing and banking news. Fed Reserve, as I mentioned, is going to raise the prospect for 2 potential rate cuts in 2019. Deutsche Bank, the largest bank in Germany, is saying that it's going to overhaul its trading operations and create what's called a bad bank. They're going to house or sell assets valued at about $56.1 billion after adjusting for risk, and it's going to shrink or shut down its U.S. equity and trading businesses. ECB President Mario Draghi, you guys remember what the ECB means, right? Is signaling his willingness once again to boost monetary stimulus if the economic conditions don't improve. That caused the euro to fall further. The Eurozone government bonds went to negative yields, surged again in June. Now more than 50% of all bonds are negative yield. So you're going to invest somewhere, you're going to get paid interest. So people are now investing in these government bonds from Europe, and they have negative interest rates. So they literally don't pay interest. There's actually a lot of people in Europe now that have negative interest rates on their homes. So just imagine a lot of the loans in a lot of parts of Europe now, since they have negative rates, is you just pay the interest. It's just a forever loan where the only thing you do is pay the interest on the loan. You don't actually pay the principal. So it's literally just Frankenstein economics, right? This can't last for too much longer. ECB, I mentioned the ECB. So the Eurozone government bonds with negative yields surged again, as I was mentioning before, at 4.3 trillion out of the 7.87 trillion. It reflects the heightened expectations for further interest rate cuts by the ECB. And good news out of Argentina, they posted their first primary fiscal surplus in 8 years in May. The bolsters, the peso, the Argentinian peso actually went up by 1% on morning trading. If you guys remember, they were at record lows against the dollar. And then the treasury yields mostly lower again. The yield curve is being inverted even more. You guys remember the lesson that I gave you? I told you last week as well, when the short-term interest rate goes up and the longer-term interest rate on the bonds goes down, they're inverted, which is an indication of a recession, some say. Experts say. Crude oil futures for the week are higher. U.S. crude 9.83% positive. International petroleum, that's a word in Spanish. International crude or oil called Brent went up 6.09%. Oil surged to its biggest gain in 5 months for 2 reasons. One, OPEC and Russia moved closer to a July meeting to talk about extending the supply cuts. And also the European Central Bank raised its hope of new stimulus to raise up demand. The reacting downing of the U.S. drone over the Strait of Hormuz. If you guys don't know what the Strait of Hormuz is, essentially there's one waterway where 1/5 of the world's oil output actually flows through. That's literally where Iran is at, basically, just to kind of give you guys an overall idea. So just think of Europe, Africa's over here somewhere. We're talking about like right here in the middle, right to the bottom left, and India is right over here somewhere, okay? So there was a drone that was shot down by Iran. Iran is saying that they were in Iran's airspace. The U.S. says that they were in international airspace, even though a lot of the forensic evidence is now showing that Iran actually did it. Iran is actually saying as well that they held back from shooting down a plane that had 35 people on it. If I'm not mistaken, it was more than 30 people. And then Trump said that he ordered a strike on Iran, but pulled back 10 minutes before it was going to be done. Because he asked how many people were going to die, and they told him there was 150 people. So things are escalating. If things escalate in that part of the world, it's going to choke up part of the world's oil supply, where transportation from, and that's why it escalated and oil went up this week. Gold 6% in the last 30 days. Until this month, gold prices barely budged. Over the past few weeks, that has changed. A lot of investors are pouring money into ETFs, exchange-traded funds. The U.S. dollar weakening, obviously, because of the expectation that the interest rates were going to cut soon. That affected a lot. China is on a huge gold buying spree. They know what's up. And also international hostility in the Middle East. So if people are nervous about the world going to the basura, the garbage, as we say here in Latin America, then people get nervous and they want to invest in something that's secure. A lot of people go to the dollar because they think that's secure. That will change about 5 or 10 years, have I been talking to you guys about. But they go into things like gold and silver, the tangible assets, right? Because that has been money for thousands of years. That's why gold has went up, because of those two things. And if there's problems in the Middle East, right, and that told you about the Strait of Hormuz, that's definitely can turn into a really big problem. Precious metals for the week: gold went up 3.85%, silver went up 2.87%. Trump officially started his campaign for 2020. He warned that if he's not reelected, the U.S. is going to face an epic stock market crash. General equity market is up over 30% since his election 2016. Boris Johnson got his boost in his campaign to replace the UK's Prime Minister May on Monday. One of his former rivals in the EU, or one of his former rivals and EU supporter Matt Hancock supported him or started backing him, and he got almost 40% of the votes in the second round on the promise that he was going to leave the EU by the 31st of October. EU states are at odds over starting talks with Albania and North Macedonia to enter the bloc. Cyprus threatened to veto any deal unless they start to toughen their line against the illegal drilling of Turkish drilling in Cyprus. So, situation in Cyprus, kind of give you guys a little bit of a background. Cyprus is an island in Europe, right between, if I'm going to try to do this backwards, so this is Cyprus, Lebanon, Israel, right down here, okay? Then you have Turkey here, and then you have Europe with Greece right over here somewhere, okay? So Cyprus essentially is divided in half. Think of it that way. Might not be perfectly in half, but you guys get my drift. Where half of it is literally Turkey, and then the other half are the Greeks, which are in Cyprus. So there's a dispute because they're saying that Turkey is drilling in the Cyprus area, and it's a big fiasco. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam is signaling the end to a controversial extradition bill that she promoted. About 1/3 of the populace, 2 million people, were out on the streets that were violently protesting that they have not seen since the British colony returned to Chinese rule in 1997. Lam is also refusing to resign. President Putin, since power in 1999, has had a little bit of a dent in his popularity due to the fact that there's been 6 years of falling real wages. He's saying that they're going to start ending, and also a new government program is going to raise the living standards. And he also had a pension reform where he's going to raise up the retirement age from 60 by 5 years, where women are going to be able to retire at 60 and men at 65. In economic news, the tensions with Iran obviously are continuing. The sanctions that have started again after Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal taking their effect. In 2018, the Iranian economy contracted by 3.9%. In 2019, it fell an additional 6%, with inflation likely to top 40%. Huawei said on Monday that the U.S. export ban is going to force the company to miss its forecast for revenue by almost $30 billion over the next couple of years. So that's definitely effective if that's what Trump wanted to do against China. Shares of Slack of the IPO on Thursday, they went public for the first time, went up by 50%. It values the company at valued the company at $23 billion, more than 90 million users, but a whopping only 100,000 are actually paying for products, Revenues for Slack soared 80% to $400 million in 2018, and guess what? As most other companies, they're not profitable. After 20 years of talks, Mercosur, which is a trade bloc in Latin America, which I am not mistaken includes Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, and Venezuela, even though Venezuela was recently kicked out. They're close to a free trade deal. It's the largest ever negotiated trade deal in the EU, says Prime Minister of Brazil. I didn't get the name, but that's what the Foreign Minister of Brazil says. EU leaders also agreed on Thursday to prolong until the end of January 2020 the economic sanctions against Russia for the ongoing turmoil in Ukraine. In technology, a Florida unnamed trucking company called Starsky Robotics has set the record for the fastest unmanned vehicle that has driven on a closed public road at 55 miles an hour. Actually, they did this close to where I grew up in Tampa, called the Selman Expressway. It's actually, the reason why they chose this is because it's an elevated roadway with barriers, right? So to kind of not get too many people in danger. In investment news, the Paris Air Show begins on Monday. A huge boost for Boeing. Not a lot of people ordering Boeing jets after their fiasco with the 737 MAX that obviously grounded all the planes. They did get an order from a company called International Airlines Group, which owns Iberia in Spain, British Airways in the UK, Aer Lingus as well, and other European carriers. And they said that they're going to buy 200 of the jets. Companies moving manufacturing away from China also is a big piece of news. The biggest bicycle maker in the world, called Giant Manufacturing Company, is moving all of its US-bound bicycles from China, moving the production to Taiwan, which is their home. Apple is also asking major suppliers to evaluate the cost implications of moving up to 50 to 30% of their production from China to other Southeast Asia companies to be able to go ahead and restructure their supply chain. So a lot of US companies are now starting to look at getting production outside of China, or moving their production outside of China. Argentina isn't ruling out a cyber attack after what President Macri called an unprecedented power blackout that struck 5 South American nations on Sunday. Uruguay, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, and Argentina, most of the southern kind of rim, as they had a huge power grid failure. A push by most EU nations to become the world's largest economic bloc to go carbon neutral by 2050 was dropped at a footnote at a summit on Thursday, with stout resistance from Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary. Airlines are canceling and or rerouting flights from the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman due to the fact that the FAA, the regulatory body in the United States that governs, let's say airlines, barred U.S. carriers from the region, as obviously other global carriers are beginning to follow suit. And in unusual facts this week, a 400-year-old painting from Italian master called Caravaggio. The painting is called Judith Beheading Holofernes, it should be. It was found in an attic in France 5 years ago. On June 27th, it's going to go to auction, and it's expecting to sell at 120 to 150 million euros. Experts are still disagreeing about its authenticity. And Bernard Arnault, which is Europe's richest person, has joined Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates as one of the wealthiest people in the world with at least $100 billion in assets. He's the chairman of LVMH, the luxury goods maker that includes Louis Vuitton, for example. They climbed 2.9%, the stocks to 368.80 euros a share. The net worth has increased to $32 billion alone because of the stock that he owns. And scientists are revealing how hours scrolling on a smartphone may be changing shape of our skulls. There's some people that are growing some horns, kind of some bony thing right here behind. And some of it you can actually be felt if you put your hand on the base of the skull. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Let me know also if you want me to do that silver video. I can't remember if I asked you last week to be able to do that. We'll see you next week.